always the whiteboard.
So I'm just watching David Pakman's video of his opinions on Gamergate. So I'm just going to, off the cuff, reply to the things that he says. Alright? In a lot of things, but not all, if you're getting flack from both sides of a conflict, that means you're pretty well positioned in neutrality in the middle. I mean, on some topics, things just aren't neutral. Climate change or whatever, you would be misrepresenting things if you presented both sides, because the science and the facts are all on one side. In this case, the facts are on Gamergate's side, but the conflict is over opinion and priorities, and so there's room for subjectivity, and that means there is a middle position that one can hold. And if all you're doing is trying to find out information, then you're doing pretty well. From what I've seen, at least on Twitter, most of Gamergate thinks that you're being pretty neutral and fair, and most of the criticism seems to come from the aggros. So I think you must be doing alright, all things considered. You're still making the mistake of conflating the trolling that's going on from both sides with Gamergate itself. And that continues to be a problem, in that there are trolls who will prey on any situation. There are people who go to memorial pages on Facebook and cause shit, and that's just unconscionable, really, isn't it? I mean, to go to people who are grieving and to fuck with them, that's beyond the pale. They don't even know the person. They don't sincerely hate the person. It's just that they're going for a reaction. And that's what we see with Gamergate. With a lot of the trolling that goes on, it's aimed at both sides and it's from third parties. I mean, there's no doubt now whatsoever that one of the most incompetent trolling groups out there, the Bill Wagner crew, is now heavily involved, particularly in doxing, or at least trying to dox, people on the pro-Gamergate side. So we know these people are there, and there's a couple of differences though. When the aggros are targeted by trolls, they immediately play it up as though this is Gamergate that's doing it. This is people directly involved in Gamergate that's saying and doing these terrible things, and they play on it to try and get sympathy. I hate to be so cynical, especially since I know someone will write it off as victim blaming, but it does certainly seem that the people on the aggro side are exploiting trolling in order to twist things about Gamergate and to make them look bad. Whereas on the Gamergate side, people who get trolled, threatened, doxed, etc. tend not to take it so seriously. I mean, that was my position. I was virtually driven to suicide by some of these people, and some of them were actually trolls. I'll get to this in a sec. This is the second difference. But prior to that, my response would always be, ignore them, don't feed them, don't give them the attention that they desire, and that has been received wisdom on the internet since the days of Usenet, you know, going all the way back to the 90s. So, given that everyone understands this about trolls, at least anyone who's been on the internet for 5 minutes should know this as a basic survival skill, one has to ask, why are the aggros taking it so seriously? Why are they playing it up? Why is Literally Woo turning up on your show and making it all about that when it's never been about that? I mean, trolling is a serious problem, and there's probably some mileage doing some interviews on the trolling issue for your show, trying to find solutions. I've done a lot of thinking about this. I don't think there are any solutions to the trolling issue that don't also do irreparable harm to some of the base strengths of the internet. Anonymity has value, and you know, if you don't want someone giving you abuse, it's usually only 2 clicks and you never have to see them again. So that's a problem. The other difference that I think we see is that, as of yet, so far as I know, I've been out of the loop for a couple of weeks, but so far as I know, none of this trolling has been connected in any way directly to Gamergate. It all seems to come from anonymous people, whereas a lot of the abuse and harassment and problems, including a lot of the stuff that I got, comes from real people, you know, people with names, with established identities, people within the media, people within the gaming industries, and it's not coming for anonymous trolls. So that there's a big difference there. People seem to feel justified by their progressive politics to act like absolute dicks to people and to get away with it as if they're, I don't know, some sort of online Batman, doing the right thing through vigilantism. And it's weird that that's coming from the aggros and not Gamergate, even though it's Gamergate that's being painted as this. So just all of you, please stop conflating these trolls with either side, really, unless it's proven, unless there's an absolutely established link. Please stop doing it. You've asked a lot of people why they are fixating upon video games, and this is completely irrelevant to Gamergate, which genuinely is about ethics in video game reporting. But you've been asking people why they seem to think that misogyny, sexism, etc. is particularly a problem in tech. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, technology, computer games, like previous targets such as atheism and tabletop games, these are vulnerable communities that are relatively small, want to expand, they're quite evangelical and enthusiastic about what they do, and so they welcome people in. And then once people come in, they seem to be able to or want to change the thing that they've been welcomed into. Why would you join a hobby or something that you clearly don't like, and then seek to destroy it? That doesn't make sense to me. I would think you would create your own thing rather than destroying what's there, because that way there's more cool stuff in the world, not less. But what do I know? Nothing, apparently. But so why are people attacking this problem in gaming? Well, they see it as a soluble issue in gaming, and it's a small community, so that they can have a much bigger effect. And that's why, I think, that's why. Here they see somewhere where they can make what they consider to be a positive difference, and that's why they attack there. It's a weak spot. I think we can agree that criticising people based on their amount of sexual partners or whatever is out. And other than a few tasteless jokes, which is kind of understandable and I think we can let slide, I don't think anyone has really dwelled upon that as being the problem with Quinn, or indeed anyone else. It's not how many people they fucked, or that they fucked anybody. The issue is that who they fucked and what the possible consequences of that fucking were. So, you mentioned reviews, and there was no review, but there was a lot of positive coverage. And as someone in media, surely you understand that for conflict of interest to be an issue, there doesn't actually have to be an issue. Conflict of interest is its own issue. The appearance of corruption or slant or collusion is a sufficient problem in and of itself, because it intercedes between what you're saying and what's being received. So even if everything was absolutely above board, whiter than white, no issue whatsoever, they did sleep together. Some people were in a position to help others, and so there's conflict of interest and the perception of wrongdoing, whether or not there was any actual wrongdoing, and that's why people recuse themselves in these instances. At least they do in responsible organisations and responsible relationships. So the other point here to make would be that it is hypocritical to simultaneously say you can't attack this woman for her sexuality and then be simultaneously attacking depictions of video game characters and so on for being sexy or promiscuous or whatever, and saying that's a negative. There's a hypocrisy there. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, I'm saying that that's what a lot of these social justice warriors are engaged in. So they're fine with Quinn fucking whoever, as am I. Fuck who you want, don't care, all for sexual freedom. But then to turn around and say, oh, Bayonetta's too sexualised, or whatever, deep, obvious, grinding hypocrisy. Not good. There's only two real problems that I have with this video of yours. And they don't mean I hate it. I mean, you're just staying your position and you're doing it calmly and reasonably, and that's all good. The first one of those problems is part of what you bring up here. You're saying, okay, there are journalistic ethics issues in gaming. Yeah, well, duh, we all know that, and we have known for years. This is just the latest flare-up, and it's a big one. But yeah, there are more important, more pressing, and other issues. That doesn't mean that it's okay. That doesn't mean it's all right. This is the fallacy of relative privation. So, you know, we're not going to help that guy who's getting his foot stamped on because that guy over there is being kicked in the balls. And to a certain degree, triage, which is what this essentially is important. But it doesn't mean that it's not a problem, and it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed. It's still an issue. It affects a lot of people's livelihoods. Fantasy and escape is important and necessary, I believe, as a psychological valve. Maybe I'm just self-aggrandizing, since I write and develop games and work alongside a lot of other games people, and I want to feel that what I do has meaning. But still, the basic point, and this is the big problem I have with a lot of the latter half of your video, is you spend a lot of time talking about, hey, there's all this other shit going on that's bad. Oh, okay, yeah, that's true. This is also bad. I'm referring back to what I just said a few minutes ago. This feels like something we can do something about. This is something we can fix. And if we fix journalistic ethics on the big gaming sites in relation to this flare-up, which is more about the indies, if they have a more open and honest ethical policy, it will also impact on how AAA developers, publishers, etc. interact with these sites, because all those things that we know go on will largely have to be declared. So, you know, in fixing the problem in relation to indies, we're also going to be fixing the problem in relation to AAA devs. And they're often quite blatant bribery of people. If things have to be disclosed and it's on the review and it's on the site, bosh. That's a big victory for Gamergate, and a good thing. But yeah, just because people are starving in Africa doesn't mean we can't also deal with problems of poverty, etc., to a lesser degree at home. Many of these other things that you mention goes back to what I was saying about the fallacy of relative privation, in that just because one thing is worse than another doesn't mean the lesser bad thing shouldn't be dealt with. I mean, this was one of the few legitimate criticisms I've seen levelled at Richard Dawkins when he responded with the Dear Muslima letter, which is, you know, don't worry about your issues. You know, don't worry about my issues with female genital mutilation and not having the right to vote or drive or whatever. You Western women, you know, you deal with your little niggling problems. That was a bit unfair of him, and the criticism that came at him for saying that was legitimate. One of the few legitimate criticisms he's been given, in my opinion. Because, you know, just because there's problems over there doesn't mean there aren't problems over here, and, you know, we should address problems as and when and where we can. Still, while Gamergate is and remains and always has been primarily about journalistic ethics, it ties into a much broader series of cultural issues, which in my opinion makes it more important, because so much comes out of culture, and video games are just about the largest, richest, most powerful and influential area of cultural heritage and influence and novelty that we have these days. You know, it's outstripping cinema, it's outstripping TV, it's outstripping everything else. So, you know, if books are important, if art is important, if literature is important, if music is important, then video games are important. And tabletop games as well. Gotta get that in there, even though they're a much smaller audience. Culture is important, and it can help at least expose people to new ideas. I don't think media has this brainwashing control that a lot of the Gamergate opposition likes to think it does. They like to think that games will make you violent, games will make you sexist, and that's bollocks. There's no research to back that up whatsoever. Where we do see problems is where you end up with an entirely closed ecosystem of information, cults, religions, extremist ideologies that close themselves off to outside influence. And we know from other research that this is how terrorist cells operate essentially. An ideological bubble is created, and the people within that bubble will tend to trend to the extreme, and that's how you get suicide bombers and all the rest. And that's what's particularly worrying about Gamergate's opposition, is that many of them exist within ideological bubbles where they don't really communicate with or listen to people outside that bubble. It's a problem with academic feminism in universities in the United States in particular, but they're far from the only issue. And this is one of the problems with the internet, is that on the one hand it allows you to make friends around the world who may share political, social and other outlooks with you, but it also allows you to cut yourself off. You referenced corporate media issues, and I know as a liberal, you, like me, are particularly concerned by news organisations like Fox News, because they're not really the news, they're a news, and the news that they put out is actually really propaganda because it's so slanted. What Gamergate has made apparent to a huge number of people, myself included, is that the so-called liberal media is equally biased and equally not presenting the news. We want facts. When people talk about objective reviews, they're not saying they don't want any opinion, it's just that they don't want people to use reviews as an excuse to politically gatekeep. And it's not about censoring anybody, because those views and so on are still valid and can still be expressed, but it's just they've got no place in a product review. And a game muddies the waters because a game is both product and a cultural artifact, so there are both objective and subjective things about it. So when people say they want objective reviews of video games, in my opinion what they really mean is they want apolitical reviews of video games, which doesn't mean people can't still have political viewpoints on them, but the place for those is an editorial or something separate, a box out in the review, not the review itself. The review should be about the item as a product. There are all kinds of things that are well written, well made, engaging, interesting stories that are still problematic, to coin a phrase, in some way. So I don't know why other people can't do this, but I can enjoy things that offend my politics as artifacts. There's plenty of films that are gung-ho, military, rah rah rah, hoorah, here come the Americans, which offend me on a political level, and that are almost propagandist. But that doesn't mean that they're bad films. It doesn't mean that the action isn't engaging. It doesn't mean that the cinematography isn't engaging. It doesn't mean that you don't sympathise with the characters or are interested in their survival or their heroism or whatever else. But if I was to review those films on a political basis, I might make them sound awful when they're not. They're good films. It's just that they don't conform to my political outlook. But so fucking what? As long as it's enjoyable as a cultural artifact, what does my politics have to do with anything in relation to that? Is it a good film? That's what you want to know. And in games, is it a good game? That's what you want to know. You don't want to know whether it conforms to some tiny Bay Area ideological bubble of what politics should be. Is it entertaining? Or in games, is it fun? Is it fun to play? Are the controls good? Are the graphics good? Is the design good? Is the story engaging and interesting? I don't care whether it conforms to neo-Marxist philosophy, even though I'm on the far left myself. It's not a factor, and a lot of these things people can decide for themselves. If someone objects to sexy character design, I don't think they're going to need a review spending and wasting half of its words telling you how sexist and awful it is. They can just look at a screenshot and know straight away, oh, this isn't for me. And because something isn't for you, or isn't for me, doesn't mean it isn't for somebody else. Why try and restrict it? And the other thing we need to consider is that when these games are scored down, that affects people's bonus triggers. It can affect whether there's a sequel. Yeah, it hurts people when you use a review, when you use your soapbox to politically gatekeep. It's an issue. Other things that have happened that are important is that Gamergate has really woken a lot of people up to just how shit the media is today. You were talking about how money in politics and money in media is twisting it. Well, that's part of these issues as well. You really have to see Gamergate in context of this broader cultural war and this broader political war. You know, it's about money. It's about radical ideologies that really have nothing significant left to fight, looking for new targets. It's threatening free expression, which should be, in my opinion, a foundational and basic and primary concern of any progressive or leftist, because free expression is the great equalizer. If we allow a small cadre of pseudo-intellectuals to control and gatekeep what we can listen to, what we can see, then that's not progressive, is it? You know, we have to allow views, ideas, concepts and art to be expressed that we personally disagree with. You know, that's what tolerance is, not forcing everybody to conform to a particular set of views. So screw that. I think you're underestimating just how important this is and how important it is going to continue to be in the future. This is the Oz trial. This is Larry Flint. You know, this is the British courts ruling on Lady Chatterley's lover. This is the big censorship culture issue of our time, as well as being about journalistic ethics. You know, why should we accept bad ethics in our journalism? And why should we accept it anywhere? And once people have dealt with it here, they're going to be wide awake to what's going on elsewhere, especially since the mainstream media started weighing in. There's one other thing I want to cover. I've noticed a mistake that you've made, and it's one that a lot of people make. An insult is not an ad hominem attack. An ad hominem attack is an argument to the person. So we have to be arguing over an issue for things to be an ad hominem. So an insult is not an ad hominem. An ad hominem is an invalid argument by saying something nasty about the person. So, for example, if I was to say David Pakman is a fuckwit, that would be an insult. It's not an ad hominem because there's no argument. I am just saying you are a fuckwit. Doesn't mean anything, it's just being an insult. Okay, so say I was to say, don't listen to anything David Pakman says, he's a fuckwit. That would be an ad hominem, because I am saying, I'm making an argument that nothing you say has any value, but all I'm backing it up with is an insult. And that's nothing, essentially. It doesn't tell you anything, it doesn't tell anyone why they shouldn't listen to you, it might imply it, but no. Okay, so we know that an insult is not an ad hominem. An ad hominem is an attack to the person that has no relevance to the argument. Okay, so say I was to say, David Pakman, don't listen to him, he's a fuckwit because he gives all sorts of time to anti-Gamergate people to spew bullshit and doesn't challenge them enough. That's not what I am actually saying, I'm just using it as an example. Is that an ad hominem? No, because it's an insult alongside an actual reason to criticise you. So that's not an ad hominem. So merely insulting someone isn't ad hominem, and insulting someone alongside a valid argument is not ad hominem. Okay? And I think everyone needs to understand that. Because people do get upset, people get angry, people use harsh language, but just because they use harsh language doesn't mean they haven't also made a decent argument that needs addressing. And that is one of the few areas in which I think I agree with social justice warriors, in that tone policing is bullshit, and that we should be allowed to be angry so long as we are also logical and rational at the same time. Anyway, that wasn't an awful video. I didn't hate it. Just those couple of things that annoyed me. That's all. Peace out.